When people write about personal experiences, you feel it. Younger writers who haven't experienced the brevity of life or grief or anything like that, the way that you convey it is different.
I'm Michael Tamlin. This is Kobo in Conversation. My guest is novelist Ana Gomez, author of Somewhere Along the Way. It's the story of Charlotte, or Charlie to her friends, a woman thrown into turmoil by the death of her father. She's given a collection of letters that her mother has been sending since she left Charlie and her dad so long ago. Those letters set Charlie on a journey, and we all get to come along for the ride. Ana, welcome to Kobo.
Thank you for having me.
This is a special Kobo in Conversation because we are back with a live audience in the Kobo offices, but also in a fairly enclosed space. So it's like the Kobo version of the Tiny Desk concerts, but with books and with a very special author. It's so nice to have you here in person.
So nice to be here.
Books like this are tough to interview because I just want to dive right into the story and talk about the characters. Why did she do this? And what was he thinking? But then everyone who's listening to it also has to have read the book, and that's more like a book club than an interview. So let me try a different angle and start at the beginning. Introduce us to Charlie.
Charlie, she's a complicated woman. She has just gone through one of the biggest loss in her life. And she's struggling to deal with it. It's the loss of her father, who was very close to her and who raised her basically from childhood. So she is grieving, she's resentful, she's angry, but she's also a very hopeful person. And she knows that this is a lesson for her that she needs to investigate and a journey that she needs to go on. And that's what the story is about.
And she was raised by her dad, but also kind of by the neighborhood that she lived in. So can you sort of describe that little bit about her that we learn when we're first getting into the book?
Sure. Well, first of all, I set the book in Brooklyn because I just fell in love with that place. We have an advertising agency in Brooklyn, and I've been going there pretty often, and I just thought it was the prettiest place, aside from Toronto, of course. She was raised by her father, who was basically the son of the entire village. So he also, I guess he had parents, but his parents were part of a community. And I wanted to bring that up in the beginning of the story because I think it's very important to see that she wasn't really at a loss in this childhood of hers because she had a lot of people. She had a village basically to bring her up. And that's why the setting of the story was as such.
Charlie discovers that her mother, who she's never known, has been writing to her father every other year since she left. And only after he dies does she get this collection of letters. How does that discovery affect her?
Well, to go from not knowing you even had a mom, you had a mom, but you never really questioned anything and, you didn't really want to get to know her, to just finding out she was alive and she was writing these letters and she was a very insightful woman. And the fact that her father had kept these things from her was probably everything all at once, and it was quite a shock to her.
And she comes up with a bit of a plan.
She does.
Tell us about her plan.
So she basically, mulls in the sadness and this grief for a while, and then she figures, he gave it to me for a reason. And it was the way that I set up the story was he was no longer there for her to ask questions. So she was basically thinking about all these things on her own. And finally she figures, he gave this to me for a reason. I'm going to get to know her and I'm going to try to find her. And at that time in her life, she was at a kind of a focal point where she was like trying to decide what to do anyway with her career. She had just gotten out of a relationship. And so it was kind of the right time for her to say, I'm just going to go and try to figure this out, try to find this woman that's been a part of my dad's life.
And she gains a traveling companion. Although she did not set out to bring a traveling companion with her. Who did she find?
She meets Graham. So he's got a story of his own, but she basically, forgets that she had a car parked in front of her house for the winter. So this goes on at the dead of winter, and she's all locked up in her home and, very oblivious to the outside world. And then finally, when she comes out in the spring, she comes out to her car and she meets Graham, who was actually sleeping in her car. And that was another surprise for her.
And she decides, or they together decide that they're going to drive across the country to reunite with her mother. And I admit, this is the one place where you almost lost me, because I thought, this isn't going to be romantic. This is going to be murder.
Totally.
But she felt something with this stranger.
Yeah, she did. So she was going through so much sadness and so much grief. And when she met him, she kind of like just picked that up from him, that there was something about him. First of all, he didn't look destitute. So he didn't look like he does this for a living. He basically had a reason for being there. And I think it's really important to say that, because not everybody will get in the car with a stranger, obviously, and I've had comments about that. But I brought in the whole mystery crime thing in there, like the jokes that they made about her leaving a piece of her hair or something like that, just for people to track her. Like she basically had a feeling that this was gonna be something that would help her, number one, discover herself. And also, I think she was at the point where she just didn't want to be alone. So she was like, you know what, either I get murdered or I'm all by myself anyway. So what's the point? So like, I'm just going to pick the lesser evil.
Right. Murdered or someone to talk to.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or someone to talk to before she gets murdered.
Right. A road trip is an interesting setup for two characters. They're moving through the landscape. So you're discovering as you travel. You're learning about each other. How did you set that balance between this becoming a travelogue of a drive across America versus two people discovering each other and discovering themselves?
Yeah. So I did not want it to be a tour book.
Right.
I had written other books in previously that were like Hawaii. I was always describing, the culture and the place itself. I had another book where an author traveled around the world and met somebody there. And I thought, I don't want to be too descriptive on where they're going. I wanted to focus on their friendship that was growing, and it was hard. Because I had to just always remember I had to build the scenery, but the scenery wasn't the focal point.
Mm-hmm. It was also a first, for me at least, because it was an EV road trip. It was a battery-powered road trip. And so the cadence, the pace of the journey is set by charging stations.
Yes. Yes.
And so you couldn't have and now we're just driving straight through the night. It's like, no, we have to stop now. We're going to charge for 4 hours.
Well, you have to build it up that way because it takes, 24 hours to get to California. And I had to stretch it out in 12 days. Mm-hmm. And so, what better way than to own an EV and have to charge every 230 miles or something.
And one of the reasons for it to be 12 days is that there's the mother-daughter relationship that features in Somewhere Along the Way. And there are lots of things that we don't want to spoil. We're not going to talk about.
I'm so impressed. You read the book?
Of course I read the book. What kind of an operation do you think we're running here?
Well, I've had some interviews where they didn't read the book and they're just asking me these. So I'm very impressed.
Read the book.
We both read the book.
It's true. They probably all read the book too. So there's this mother-daughter relationship that's being revealed, and Charlie is learning about her mother one letter at a time. And there's a finite number of letters, which means you have to figure out you're spacing out charging and you're spacing out letters. And so you're really having to manage a pace in this book of how much do you reveal about these two people who are getting to know each other.
Right.
And how much do you reveal about the mother who we don't know anything about? How were you juggling all of that as you were putting this book together?
On a spreadsheet.
Okay, tell me all about that.
Well, I I figured 15 letters. She was 30, over 30. And so I had to put the letters. I had to do every 2 years that the mother would write, and I had to put the year. And then I would tally it up and make sure that it aligned, and the events that I wanted. So you think about the pivotal moments where the relationship is developing, and you relate that to the letter. Because if you notice, every letter kind of brings them closer together because of what she wrote in that letter. So there's like, you have that spreadsheet where you even have, the feelings. So she's elated, she's sad, and then she's brought back down, and then she's hopeful. All those things were actually on a spreadsheet.
There's some depictions of mental illness in
Yes.
Somewhere Along the Way that seem very carefully rendered. What did you draw on to get those descriptions right?
I'm always been open about. I grew up with a mom who had mental illness, and a mom who was in and out of rehab. So those were childhood experiences that I actually had, and the things that the mom did, or the phases of the mom's life, is basically the growth that I saw of my mother when she was going through this. And that's why it's so personal to me, because in a way, I've lost both parents in the last 3 years, and I wanted to honor that. And it's funny because my mom and dad were, they weren't together at the end, but they loved each other so much, and I kind of wanted to depict that in the story. Yeah.
It comes through beautifully. I have to
Thank
say.
you.
Being an author is not your only job. And I think that the spreadsheets gave us a hint of this. Describe what you are doing with the rest of your time.
So I'm the chief financial officer of a network of advertising agencies based in Toronto and New York. And it's no fixed address in Mischief. And previous to that, I was 18 years in advertising with Leo Burnett, which is a Publicis Group company. So, yeah.
And so would you be okay if we just turn this into a 50% writing, 50% advertising, accounting,
Oh, for
financial
sure.
broadcast? We can just do both of those things?
Two things I love.
I'm game if you are. But tell me, tell me a bit about your career path and then where writing snuck into it.
Sure. Well, I didn't think I would be doing this. I was very busy trying to build a career. I moved here from the Philippines, so I immigrated from the Philippines, and we would just focus on raising the kids. And then again, with the losses in my life, I decided to write a book about 12 years ago, and I didn't tell a soul. I self-published on Amazon, and then I pressed published, and I went for a long run. And I thought, okay, this is it, it's done. And then everything just snowballed. So somebody found me on Facebook, built a Facebook page, gave me 30,000 followers. I don't know how. And then said, hey, you didn't finish that first book. You need to write a second. I'm like, yeah, maybe they didn't have closure. So I wrote the second one. I self-published the second one. And then by the other books, an agent had kind of approached me, and then I got published. So it was a happy surprise. I did not come out to anyone, so just want you guys to know I hid it for a long time.
Yeah.
And it was just a few years ago when our CEO saw an article in USA Today about one of my books and just blasted it to the entire agency. So
that sounds like
kind
something a
of what-
CEO would do.
Yeah, he was so proud. Yes, but I wouldn't call it a fluke, but it wasn't in a grand plan or anything. And I love to write, so this is like the best stress reliever ever.
So let's go back to that first book for a second, 'cause
Yeah.
I don't want to let that get away. What was going through your mind when you thought, in addition to being a CFO and doing all these other things, I'm also just going to write a book over here on the side. What was around you, or what was happening that made that feel like the right thing to do?
It was therapeutic. I think I was
Okay.
going through things in my life that I wanted to write about, and if you look at the way that my books are set up, they're in every phase of my life. There's a midlife crisis book. There's a Hallmark happy ending book because I'm happy. There's different segments, and I think that that's what writing has done for me. It has actually really been a mirror to my life without me having by being fictionalized. And the one thing that I learned when I wrote the first book, how many women had just identified with that book, and have stayed with me all these years because they find we all built a kinship.
When you were putting those first books together, was there anything you looked to figure out how to do your first one, or did you just go for it?
No, I one day I woke up and there was a signing event in Chicago. I'd never been to a book signing event. And I told my husband, I'm going to book 2 nights at the Palmer House and I'm going to go to this signing event. And he's like, why? I'm like, I don't know. I just want to see what the books were. And I made friends for life over there. Colleen Hoover was there. I'm name dropping. Other famous authors, and they just kind of mentored me and guided me and said, you should write, you should really write. And that's how it started.
And so when you wrote that first book, was there, what were you hoping for? What would you hope would come from that?
It was just therapeutic.
Yeah. And did that, as you then wrote your second and your third, did it continue to have that same kind of therapeutic impact for you, or did it start to kind of transform as an experience?
It started to transform as an experience. So first it was therapeutic, and then it basically built a world for me that has made me a better leader. Because you go to that other side of life where you have housewives and women who read all day and take your story so seriously and actually think your husband is the main character. It's a different world and it's a different life, and it's a great one. So you meet these people from all walks of life and who've opened up to you about so many different things, and then you kind of go on this life's journey with all these people that actually your stories resonate with, right? It's harder to pick up new readers than it is to have this group of readers that read every single book you write. That's what I'm learning.
And tell me a bit more about your relationship with your readers. Are they individual people that you've gotten to know? Are they a big abstract audience? Tell me about that.
We have a Facebook page called the Bray's Butterflies, because Bray was my pen name. And butterflies because these women have been with me for 10 years, and they've evolved from very shy women to women who now have jobs and are outside of the house. And I watched them grow through that. So that's the kind of relationship I have with them. And I used to come in more often, but every Friday I'll be like, hey, here's what's happening. My son quit school, or things like that. And we would just talk personally. Right now there's about 300 of them. And they go to book signings. They fly from California. The last one I had in Kentucky 2 weeks ago, people flew from California and from different places to be with me, to sit there with me while I sat there and signed books. To me, that's so valuable. It's just a human experience that I think I'm learning from this writing career. It's the human experience and the ability to take everyone's life lesson and put it in your own, and just help you to be a good leader, basically.
And let's talk a bit more about how those blend together. As you've continued to write, you have your writing life and you have your other career. And do those feel like two parallel things, or do they blend together?
It depends on the situation.
Sure.
They blend together, and as far as I'm very open that I do write books, they don't blend together when you're in a meeting as a CFO pushing policy and procedure and, talking about process and
Right.
people that not signing their expense reports. And you still want that kind of that impression that you have this career and this career is important to you. So there's times when you have to separate them. I have an example that just happened where we're implementing a system, and the system guy actually sent me an email with a picture of my book, and I basically had to call him and go, let's separate the two. I'm very uncomfortable.
Right.
It's good and bad in a sense that you just really have to know your boundaries.
Sure. And I guess part of what I'm wondering about is, there's the external world, and then there's your mental world.
Yeah.
And is there a book kind of cooking in the back of your head while you're trying to do year-end financial close? Or is that something, one of them shuts off and then the other one turns on when you sit down?
No, it never shuts off.
Okay.
So you're writing in a notebook and people think you're writing work notes, but actually you just got this idea and you're just scribbling it there so you don't forget.
Yeah. And are there authors or stories that have had influence or inspiration for you, either when you were writing those first books or with this one that we're talking about today?
So many. I read a lot. But, I'm more on the traditional side. Like, Thornbirds is my favorite book of all time. And I know it's aging me. But there's other authors. Like, I'm a big Stephen King fan. Like, I go across all genres.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I just love to read. But I never read a book when I'm writing.
You're one of those people who, when you're writing your own book, you have to kind of push other voices to the side.
Yeah, because you have a tendency to get ideas and write the way you're reading.
Yeah.
And I don't want to do that.
You sometimes have a co-writer, a collaborator.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit about that relationship?
Sure. So the Christopher Polaha is a Hallmark actor, and we're collaborating on a series of books based in Hawaii. And there's two of them. Now we're working on the third book together. It's both easy and hard to have a co-author. It makes it easier because you're doing half the work. Slice the number of words in half, and that's what you're writing. But it's also hard because you have to make sure that you're aligned in your thoughts, ideas, what the arc will be, or even in your voice.
Mm-hmm.
We've kind of solved that by putting two voices together. His and mine, alternate chapters, boy, girl, or whatever, POV. But it's still a matter of really being able to trust someone and be vulnerable, because they're basically reading something you've written that no one has ever read.
Mm-hmm.
And working alone, I don't even have beta readers. I just write and then I send it to the editor. Like, I don't share my writing with anyone. So this writing with a co-author has been a big change for me, a good one. But it took a while for me to be vulnerable enough to say, here's my first chapter,
So tell me a bit about that division of labor then, because you've described yourself as someone who will have a plot laid out in a spreadsheet. And so how is that different when you have another person who's doing, as you say, half of the words?
It's organic. It's basically, he calls it chapter 10 is he'll write one and then I'll answer with another, and then he'll write another. So it's basically, we don't know what it's going to look like at the end.
So you really are just discovering plot along the way.
Yeah.
As this interaction's going back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, we know what it's about. Like, where is it going to be set? Set Maui. Okay, who's going to be in it? Okay, these guys. Okay, let's go.
Is that different than how you work normally the rest of the time?
It is for many reasons. One, you're on someone else's timeline as
Sure.
well. And two, it's basically, if I don't feel like, there's times when he writes 3 chapters and I am so busy with work, I don't pick it up till like 3 weeks later.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that thing where like you're feeling the pressure because he's contributing and you're not, but you're traveling for work or whatever. So those are the things to contend with.
So when you're writing on your own, how much are you plotting in advance and how much are you just figuring it out as you go?
I don't plot in advance. So for example, when I was approached by Kobo to write this book, I threw out this idea. I had no idea what the story was going to be. In fact,
Excellent.
She was going to be on a bus. And I'm like, she could be on a bus. Like, how's she going to be on a bus? And there were so many things that I had to kind of tweak, but I did it as I went along. I just knew what I wanted to write about, which is I think my pitch to Jessica was woman discovering her mom. And that was all I knew I was going to write.
Pretty good. That's reading about your career was where I first saw the word killing. What does that mean?
So it's kilig, and it's a Filipino word for like to thrill. So when you when you swoon, when you get thrilled, when you get excited, that's what it's called.
And is that a thing that that you're looking for, or you reach for as you're bringing characters together?
No, not really. I mean, I go for romance, but more women's fiction. So there's a lot of romantic scenes. But I think that was coined the way it is because they just thought that my books were very romantic and swoony, so they gave it that name, which is actually a very good compliment.
It really is. Unlike a lot of authors, you don't have a specific office or writing room or corner of the living room where you do your writing. What environment do you find most conducive to getting your work done?
On travel trips, airport, bathroom, lobby, hotel room. Yeah.
You wrote your first 6 books in hotels around the world.
Yes.
And so what makes a hotel the best place to do writing for you?
I think it's just my head is clear and there's so much scenery around me. You open the doors and you're in Paris and you're looking out, or in London, or even in New York, and you're by yourself, I think. Right?
But at the same time, you wrote a book during COVID where
Yeah.
you couldn't travel all the time. How was that different?
It was difficult.
Really?
Yeah, it was. But we moved to, my husband has aging parents, and so we moved to Indiana to take care of them. And we moved to a lakefront house, which was very helpful. So you just sit outside and just write.
You referred in our conversation to the deaths of your own parents, to talking about care of aging parents. That's something that comes up in various ways through this book. How hard is it to put that down on paper when it's something that you've lived through so recently?
It was hard.
Yeah.
It was emotional. I think, writing for Kobo, it reminded me that I could say what I wanted to say in less words than that I would normally say. And so it was trying to get the emotion out of it and make sure that I was conveying what I was feeling in the least, in the most concise way, basically. But it was hard. But then again, I think when people write about personal experiences, you feel it.
Yeah.
It's not a dig to younger writers, but younger writers who haven't experienced the brevity of life or grief or anything like that. The way that you convey it is different from someone who's actually gone through these grueling moments.
With this community of people who've been following your work over the years, that means they've also followed you through your own life experiences and then seen them show up in the books. How is that conversation with them as they've sort of seen things kind of transfer from life onto the page?
You mean like my sisters, or right?
Well, or the people like in your Facebook group who you're saying, oh, it's like I'm taking care of my my in-laws right now.
Yeah. It's been fine. I mean, when I write in my stories, when I write, like if I refer to, I'll tell people in advance, basically.
Okay.
My sisters say I'm writing this. They're like, okay, great.
You are the first author who we have talked to who has used AI in their writing, but you used it in a very specific way for this book. Can you tell us what that was?
Sure. Lord knows how many hours I was saved by using AI. So it instead of Googling, you just ask AI a question and it just gives you all the information there. One of them, which was, if I was to go from Brooklyn to Malibu, how many times would I have to stop in an EV? And where are the charging stations? Instead of Googling charging stations.
Yeah. And then having to get a map.
Doing a map, yeah. And I got all the answers there. And that's basically what I built my story around.
Mm-hmm. And I find that so interesting because as I've talked to different people about how AI can show up in writing, a lot of it is about like that. It's like, I just didn't have to go and dig for X, which meant I had more time to do the thing that I'm trying to do, which is actually write the book.
Right.
Yeah. I heard you say on our sibling rival podcast, the Kobo Writing Life podcast, that you don't have time for writer's block. I don't have time for procrastination either, but I do it anyway. So how is it that you manage to just defeat writer's block on demand?
Well, as I mentioned, I'm always somewhere, going somewhere, doing something. And so writer's block to me is just sitting there and having nothing in my head to write. I don't have that time because I only write when I have something, because I'm doing so many other things.
Okay.
So, so when I feel like writing and I have something to write about, I have that time. When I'm busy or focused on board meetings or presentations, then I don't have writing in my head,
Mm-hmm. So for the other CFOs out there who are thinking about writing a book, is there anything that you can tell them to encourage them to put that first page, to write that first page?
Do it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's my first tip to writers when I was starting this career was just like, keep your phone or a notebook with you and just write down your thoughts. Mm-hmm. Those thoughts become sentences, they become paragraphs, and then they become a story. So, I mean, anybody who wants to do it can do it.
You've published independently. You've published with a traditional publisher. You've done this crazy experiment with Kobo Originals, and we've done this book together. Have those experiences all been the same for you, or have they been different?
They were different. I found more independence with the Kobo experience. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's because I was dealing with someone who was just very open to what I was doing, but the Kobo experience was a really good experience for me. The self-publishing experience is different in the sense that you basically own everything, and and I was with Kobo too when I was self-publishing. Mm-hmm. So the traditional experience, I think, is basically, I would call it like a lesson in fiction writing, because mm-hmm. you get beat down, you get, not in a bad way, you get changes made, you get everything done, and it teaches you how to be a better writer. So each experience, I think, has been really different.
And so given the choice of engaging with an editor or building a book on your own, is there one that you prefer?
Well, right now, I'm sticking to engaging an editor and going traditional, only because it's just, I'm not as lucky as the other full-time authors. I don't have time. So if I can get any help in editing or in marketing or even mm-hmm. posting, which is the thing I hate most, then I'll just go that way. And I think I want to stress too that I feel very blessed, because I'm not depending on my success as an author to really identify who I am as a mom, as a mother, as a wife. It's a side blessing.
Mm. And so as final advice for all of the authors out there, what is the very best hotel to do writing at?
Place Vendôme in Paris.
Excellent.
You look across the street and all the shops are there. They inspire you greatly.
Anna, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an honor.
I have been speaking with Anna Gomez, author of Somewhere Along the Way, proudly published by Kobo Originals. Find it and the other books that we've spoken about at Kobo and Conversation's home on the web, kobo.com/conversation. Check in the show notes for a link. Subscribe in your podcast player to catch every episode. And if you enjoyed this one, tell your favorite road trip companion. Trust us, nothing feels better than talking about books. Kobo and Conversation is produced by Nathan Maharaj and hosted by me, Michael Tamlin. Thank you for listening. And we're done.